Does anybody here remember the 1965 New York World's Fair?
Yes. Yeah.
Ah, good, good, good. Some of you probably don't even remember 1965. But for those who weren't there, it was a magical time. It was with unicorns and dragons. And as an example, when there were things called the World's Fair, and they were organized by a committee, very much like the Olympic Committee, and New York City had put in a bid to host a World's Fair. And the committee said, no, we're giving it to some other city. So just like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland in the old days, the city said, we're going to call our friends together and we're going to put on a fair anyway, and they did. And that was the New York World's Fair. One of the leftovers from the fair, I went there on my high school senior trip, by the way. One of the leftovers from the fair was an apartment complex in Queens that had been built to house the people who worked at the fair. And it was on 47 acres. It has a series, I think about a half dozen pairs of apartment towers, 18 stories high, about 15,000 apartments. It had a street of stores, an office building, movie theater, some underground shopping as well. It's like a little city. And it was called Lefrak City, still there. And as the 60s faded away, Lefrak made some bad management choices, and the demographic of Lefrak City went downscale. And that's when I came into the picture. I had just taken a civil service exam, which used to be how you got a federal job back in those days. Was you took the test, they put your name on a list, sent it around to the various agencies, and when you got called, you went in. And it took months. And so I was waiting, and I needed a job in the meantime, so I joined the Lefrak City Police Force. Now, if I hadn't known already, the way you know it's a private police as opposed to public is the training, and which consisted of sitting across the desk from the chief while he read my resume, and he said, oh, I see you were raised in Texas, so you know how to handle yourself. I wanted to say something about misusing stereotypes, but I needed the job, so I just said, yep. He didn't question me at all about other things that were on the resume, like I had some time as military police. I'd worked undercover for a detective agency, and I'd been a store detective in a major Manhattan department store. Anyway, so I had those things, and you also had to get a sidearm. You had to get a license to carry a gun. And in order to do that, they took my fingerprints, they sent them off to Albany, gave me a uniform and a club, and then put me at one of the gatehouses because I didn't have a gun. At the gatehouses were little cylindrical glass structure in between each pair of apartment towers. And you sat there at the desk and screened visitors, which was not nearly as enriching as I hoped it would be. And so I was sitting there one evening, trying to be useful, and I saw a young man coming toward me from one of the apartment buildings. He was, they also had a glass enclosed walkway from the building to the gatehouse. And he's coming, running like this. And as he got closer, I saw he was Hispanic with a tank top, curly brown hair. And when he got closer, I could see that he had marks on his arm that were probably going to turn into bruises the next day or so. And he had a little blood in his hair. And he couldn't quite get out a complete sentence. And it wasn't because he had language difficulties. It was because he was just overwrought with emotion or out of breath or something. And he's there. He's crazy. A pipe. He's got a knife. A pipe. And a baby. And well, now, I didn't know what was going on, but I heard three key words, which were crazy, knife, and baby, and that to me spelled emergency. So I got on the phone, and I called the security desk, and I asked for a backup, and I told the guy we're going into the apartment building. By the way, this was not Hollywood, which is why you always ask for backup. And so we went in there, and got to the building. I looked at the elevators, and decided they just weren't that reliable. So we took the stairs and ran up 7 flights. I could do 7 flights in those days. Not so much anymore. But on the way up, because this was a new job, but it wasn't my first rodeo, so I thought about the principles involved. One is that in a domestic dispute, these things can be very volatile because you do not want to get in the middle and both sides turn on you. So I had to be careful. That brings us back to the first rule of policing, which is when an officer is on the scene, he absolutely and without question has to be in charge, because you're always going to be outnumbered, and if you lose control, results can be fatal. But now getting control and keeping it is the art of the job. So I'm thinking all these things, and we get up to the floor, and first thing I noticed that there was no crowd in the hallway, which is great. That's one thing I don't have to deal with. We got to the door, he opens up, and it was like a studio apartment. Right in front of the door was where the bed was. And I could see in the middle of the bed was a baby a couple months old, not crying, apparently unharmed. Okay, that's good. Meanwhile, as soon as the door went open, this guy starts yelling, "I told you I was going to get him, you're going to be in trouble now." And I look over, and there is a slender young woman. I later found out she was 19, very pretty, long dark hair, wearing only a white bra and panties. But I couldn't appreciate that because she's also carrying, in her left hand, she has a kitchen knife about 10 to 12 inches long. She has a half-inch steel pipe in the other hand, which is even longer, and that's probably what did the damage to her friend. And she's got a wild look in her eyes. So the first thing was to tell the guy who was still yelling, "Shut up, go in the kitchen." And he did, which is good. Now the next step, I got between her and the baby, and then I reached down, I took out my club, I took off my hat, and I set them down on the bed over here. Now the reason you take off your hat is you want to create a less authoritative and threatening profile. That's the theory anyway. So I put them down. And then I said to her, "Good evening." She didn't say anything. She said, "What's your name?" "Would you be more comfortable if you put some clothes on?" And that broke the spell. She looked down and realized she's standing in front of a stranger in her underwear. And she stepped over and put the knife and the pipe on the corner of the bed and went to a chair for her clothes. I grabbed the knife and the pipe, put them over by the hat. She pulls the top on over her head, and she's stepping into the shorts when the door bursts open, and here are the 3 patrolmen who are my backup. And they come in, they see me standing by the bed, and her pulling up her shorts. And eyebrows were raised, but I just shrugged, what are you gonna do? And I gave them the knife and the pipe. The senior man told me to go back down to my desk. He'd stay there and take the statements and whatnot. And so I went down, and now the young lady packed up the baby and took it back to her parents' house, which was probably a good thing. And I know it's not politically correct to blame the victim, but usually in these cases when a woman takes up a weapon, there's been an aggravating precursor. I got off the desk. He sent me on patrol, even though I never did get the gun because Albany lost my fingerprints. That's the episode of Law and Order you never see. And the reason I'm telling this story now really is because there's a lot of talk about police violence and that sort of thing. But really, sometimes if you're paying attention, all you have to do is take off your hat.